A steakhouse parking lot in Las Vegas, 1995. There's a film crew here. Lights, a camera, Martin Scorsese somewhere behind it calling the shots. And a man is walking across the asphalt toward another man, about to raise a pistol and put 2 bullets into the back of his head. The thing you need to understand is that the man holding the gun is not an actor. He's a real hitman. He has really killed people, beaten them, strangled them, and once held a man's head in a vice. And now he's standing on a movie set, being paid to do on camera the exact kind of thing he spent his real life doing in the dark. Not a man playing a killer. A killer playing himself. His name is Frank Colotta, and the movie is Casino. Every other mob movie ever made hired actors and taught them to seem dangerous. This one did something no other film had the nerve to do. It went and got the real thing and pointed a camera at it. This is the story of how the real mob reacted to Casino. And the answer is stranger and frankly more unsettling than anger. They didn't try to stop this movie. They didn't threaten it. They didn't shake it down. They didn't put a boss in front of the cameras to kill it. They did the opposite. They helped make it. By the end of this, you're going to understand why Casino has always felt a little different from every other mob film. Why it feels less like a story someone wrote and more like something caught on a security camera. The vice, the rubber mallet, the car bomb, the cornfield. You're going to find out which of those really happened, and the answer is almost all of them. But here's the part I want you to hold on to, because it's the thing that makes this strange instead of just impressive. The deeper you go into how real this movie is, the less it feels like a movie at all. It starts to feel like something you weren't supposed to be allowed to see. So the question isn't really how accurate Casino is. The question is how far the accuracy goes, and at what point watching it stops being entertainment. And there's one more thing. The single scene everyone remembers, the one the movie is most famous for, is the one scene they got wrong. But not the way you'd think. The real version didn't come out until 12 years later, and it was worse. To understand how a movie ends up knowing things a movie has no business knowing, you have to understand one man. His name, again, was Frank Colotta. He'd grown up in Chicago alongside a kid named Tony Spilotro, the two of them childhood friends, running the streets together long before either one became something the rest of the world would be afraid of. When Spilotro was sent to Las Vegas to protect the mob's interests, he brought Colotta along to handle the wet work, running a burglary crew the newspapers called the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang, and doing, personally, the kind of thing the movie would later reenact. He wasn't a side character in the Vegas mob. He was the muscle underneath the whole operation the film is about. And then, in 1982, the thing happened that makes this entire story possible. Colotta found out that Tony Spilotro, his friend since childhood, had put his name on a list. There was a contract on him. So Colotta did the only thing left to do. He flipped. He sat down with the federal government and told them everything he knew. And years later, he'd sit down and tell Hollywood everything too. You have to understand what kind of man was doing the telling. Long after, an interviewer asked him what it had been like, and Colotta talked about killing people the way you'd talk about a job you used to have. You become the judge, jury, and executioner, he said. Most guys who got whacked probably deserved it. That's the voice that guided this movie, not a consultant, a confessor. When the writer Nicholas Pileggi set out to tell the true story of mob-era Las Vegas, and when Scorsese set out to film it, the man who told them what really happened, the murders, the methods, the way it actually worked, was Frank Colotta. Pileggi said it plainly. Without Frank Colotta, there would have been no Casino. Most movies that say, based on a true story, are lying to you a little. They keep the names and invent the rest. Casino did the opposite, and the further into it you go, the colder it gets. Start with something almost funny. In the movie, the De Niro character is so obsessive that he checks how many blueberries are in the kitchen's muffins. That's real. The actual man insisted that every single muffin get exactly the same number of blueberries, so no customer would ever get less than another. The film didn't exaggerate him to make a point. It just wrote down what he actually did. Then it gets harder. There's a scene where a man is caught cheating, and casino security smashes his hand flat with a rubber mallet. That happened too. The real boss ordered a cheat's hand broken to send a message, turning a right-handed man into a lefty. Years later, the real man reviewed that scene, and his only complaint was a technical one. "Rubber mallets," he noted dryly, "are less likely to leave a mark." Then it stops being about discipline and starts being about death. In the film, someone tries to kill the main character with a car bomb, and he survives. Real again, 1982. A bomb wired to his Cadillac outside a Tony Roma's on Sahara Avenue. He should have died. He lived only because that particular model of car happened to have a metal plate built in under the driver's seat, and it took the blast. The movie got that right down to the physics of it. And then there's the detail that tells you what this movie really is. They shot inside a real Las Vegas casino. They had the run of the place, the floor, the restaurants, the back rooms, all except one. There was a single room the production was not allowed to enter, the counting room. The exact room where, in real life, the mob had skimmed millions off the top, uncounted and untaxed. The one door that stayed shut to the cameras was the one that mattered most. So they built a fake one. Think about what that means. A movie so close to the truth that the only thing standing between it and the real crime was a locked door. They weren't guessing. They had the real men. And they had one more of them than just Colotta, a second insider, standing right there in the frame. The reason the writer ever got near the real story in the first place was one particular man, the mob's own lawyer. His name was Oscar Goodman, and he was the attorney who defended the real people this movie is about. The boss, the killer, even the boss's wife. He was the one who introduced Pileggi to them. The entire accuracy of this film, everything we've just walked through, traces back through Goodman like water through a pipe. So when Scorsese needed an actor to play the lawyer character in the film, he asked a casting director to go find someone who looked like Oscar Goodman. And the casting director came back and said there was a problem. There was no look-alike. So Scorsese made the only logical choice available to a man making this particular movie. He used the real Oscar Goodman, the actual mob lawyer, playing himself, standing up in a fictional courtroom to defend fictional versions of the real clients he'd defended for years in real ones. The one human detail that gives it away, by accounts from the set, is that he kept forgetting his lines. A real hitman, reenacting a real killing. A real mob lawyer, replaying his real career. This is not a movie that cast the mob. In long stretches, it simply is the mob, standing in front of a camera, doing again what it once did for real. And that lawyer, the one who couldn't remember his lines, 4 years after this movie came out, Oscar Goodman was elected mayor of Las Vegas. Remember that. We'll come back to it. Everything so far has been almost charming. A man too obsessed with muffins, a flashy dresser, but a confession has a floor to it, and this one goes much lower than muffins. There's a scene in Casino that people can barely sit through. A man's head put into a vice and tightened. It's the moment even fans of the film look away from. And it is real. Back in 1962, a man named Billy McCarthy was being tortured for a name. His killers wanted the name of an accomplice, and he wouldn't give it up. So, by the accounts later given in court, they put his head in a vice and turned it until he broke and told them what they wanted. And then they killed him anyway. Tony Spilotro did it. Frank Colotta, the man from our parking lot, was there. And decades later he swore to it under oath in a courtroom. The movie shows you a version of this. It does not show you how long it took. And that's the thing I need you to understand about this film. The most horrifying scene in it isn't Hollywood reaching for shock. It's Hollywood being accurate and still flinching, still showing you less than what happened. Which should make you wonder what else got softened on the way to the theater. Because it turns out the most famous scene in the whole movie is exactly that. Something they softened. Something they got wrong. And the real version was waiting. Here's the scene everyone remembers. The Pesci character and his brother, dragged into an Indiana cornfield, beaten with baseball bats while they're still alive, and buried in a shallow grave. It's the most brutal thing in the movie. It's the image people carry out of it. And it didn't happen that way. Here's the strange part. The filmmakers, with all their real insiders, all their hitmen and lawyers, didn't know how it really happened either. Because in 1995, when this movie came out, nobody outside the men who did it knew the truth. It stayed buried in every sense for another 12 years. Then, in 2007, at a federal trial, a mob killer turned witness finally told it. And the real version is quieter than the movies, and so much worse. On a June day in 1986, Tony Spilotro and his brother Michael were told they were being promoted. Tony was going to be made a captain. Michael was finally going to become a made man. It was supposed to be the proudest day of their lives. They were so reassured by it that they left their guns at home. They were driven to a house in a quiet suburb and taken down into the basement where they thought a ceremony was waiting for them. And the men down there, men they knew, men they trusted, beat them and strangled them to death. Only afterward were the bodies driven out to that cornfield and buried, where they were never supposed to be found. The movie gave them a violent death in a field. Reality gave them the oldest death there is, killed by their own people, lured in with an honor, walked to the grave by men they trusted, having handed over their guns at the door. The most accurate mob movie ever made hit a wall in exactly one place, the one place where the truth was still buried when the cameras rolled. It could only ever be as honest as the secrets that had come out so far. Everywhere the truth was known, it matched it. And the one spot where it wasn't, the movie had to guess. And even guessing, it guessed cleaner than the real thing. By the time the movie came out, the man who'd guided its accuracy had a verdict of his own. Colotta watched the thing he'd helped build and gave it the bluntest review it ever got. "It's a good movie," he said. Was it accurate? Mostly, and where it wasn't, he said, it wasn't because anyone got the facts wrong. It was because real life is boring, and they had to juice it up. Think about who's saying that. The man who lived the murders is telling you the movie's only real lie was making his life a little more exciting than it already was. That's the maker's verdict. But there was one man left who could judge it from the other side. The side it was about. And you have to understand how alone he was by then. By the time Casino reached theaters, almost everyone in it was dead. Tony Spilotro, beaten to death in that basement. the woman the Sharon Stone character is based on, dead in a Los Angeles motel, an overdose at 46. The crew, scattered into graves and prison cells. There was exactly one principal figure still breathing, still around to watch Hollywood dig his entire world up out of the ground and stand it back on its feet. His name was Frank Lefty Rosenthal, the man De Niro played. The last one left. He was more than the movie showed. He didn't run one casino, he secretly ran 4 of them at once for the Chicago mob. He earned the nickname Lefty, sitting in front of the United States Senate and refusing to answer, pleading the 5th 38 separate times with his left hand in the air. And now here he was, an old man, watching another man wear his life on a movie screen. And there's one fight in that movie that was the fight of his real life. In 1976, the state finally caught what everyone already knew, that Rosenthal was running those casinos without ever holding a gaming license. So they moved to push him out. And this is where the real Lefty shows you exactly who he was. He refused to disappear. Instead of going quiet, he went the other way entirely and put himself on television, hosting his own live show, broadcast from inside the Stardust, planting himself in front of the whole city that was trying to make him vanish. It took them years, but in the end, they won. They put his name in the Black Book and barred him from setting foot inside any casino in the state he had secretly ruled. The city didn't just move on from Lefty Rosenthal, it threw him out. And years later, from exile, that same man sat and watched Hollywood rebuild the entire world he'd been pushed out of, around Robert De Niro. And he reviewed it. He actually sat down and wrote out his verdict on the film about his own life. He called it a mixed bag. He said he couldn't break down the degree of accuracy versus dramatic license, but the scenes he allowed were relatively on target. And then the line that answers the whole question we started with. He said the movie gave its audience a fact-based snapshot of events and people behind the scenes from the good old days in Las Vegas. He praised the writer, and he praised De Niro. And then, with the confidence of the only man alive who'd actually been there, he added that Pileggi understood these characters better than Scorsese did. The last survivor, correcting the director. That's your answer. Why does Casino feel like a documentary? Because the one man who lived it watched the reenactment of his own life and signed off on it. There is no higher confirmation than that, the sole survivor, looking at the resurrection of his dead world and saying, essentially, yes, that's how it was. And every single person who might have argued with him was already lying in a grave the movie had recreated. At some point, the line between the real men and the movie men just stopped existing. Frank Colotta, the real killer from our parking lot, became a kind of celebrity off the back of the film. And the way it happened closes a circle worth sitting with. Years before the movie, Colotta had summed up the whole rise and fall of mob Vegas in a single line. It should have been so sweet. Everything was in place. They were handed paradise on earth, and they threw it all away. Scorsese liked it so much he put it, almost word for word, into the mouths of the characters. The movie ends on a real hitman's real words. And then Colotta did the strangest thing of all. He started running a tour, a casino tour of Las Vegas, driving tourists to the real spots where the real story had happened, telling them the stories of his own murders, the one man who could say he'd actually been there. Follow what that actually is. A real crime became a movie, and then the real criminal spent his final years selling the movie's version of his crimes back to the public. Reality became fiction, and the fiction became his day job. The hitman didn't just get put on screen, he turned the screen into a paycheck. The others didn't get that. Tony Spilotro, the man the movie made into a legend, was beaten to death in a suburban basement by his own people and dumped in a field, a real ending crueler than anything the film gave Pesci. Jerry, dead in that motel at 46. And Rosenthal, the last man standing, dying of a heart attack alone in a Miami condo in 2008. And it later came out, an FBI informant the whole time. And Oscar Goodman, the mob's lawyer, who stood up in that movie and played himself. He became the mayor of Las Vegas, the smiling public face of the city the mob had built and lost. The man who spent his career defending the killers ended up selling the world the story they left behind. So here's the answer to the thing we started with. Casino feels like a documentary, because, in all the ways that matter, it basically was one. The mob never went to war with this movie the way it once went to war with The Godfather. It didn't have to. It was already inside. The hitman was in the parking lot. The lawyer was at the defense table. The boss was reviewing the final cut. Hollywood didn't sneak up on the mob and steal its story. The mob walked onto the set and showed them how it was done. That's how the real mob reacted to Casino, not by fighting it. They opened the door. They helped Hollywood rebuild their world, they judged the result, and in the end they became part of the myth the movie sold back to everyone else. And the one thing the movie couldn't get right, the cornfield, the death everyone remembers, it got wrong only because that was the single secret still buried when the cameras rolled, and it wouldn't come out of the ground until 2007. The most accurate mob movie ever made was only ever as honest as the graves that had been opened. Everywhere the truth was known, the film matched it. And the one place it was still hidden, reality was waiting, 12 years down the road, with something worse. And here's the last turn of it. For decades, the mob was the thing Las Vegas tried to hide, the secret under the neon, the reason for the locked counting room. Then this movie came out and became the version of the story everyone knows, the way most people understand how the mob built the city and lost it. And somewhere in there, Vegas stopped hiding the mob and started selling it. There's a mob museum now. There are mob tours, one of them Colotta's. The city turned the men it once buried in the desert into a brand. The movie didn't just capture the mob, it handed the mob back to the world as an attraction. So go back, one more time, to that parking lot. Frank Colotta, a real killer, stepping into the light to play a killer, in a movie about the world he actually bled in. He didn't have to act. He just had to remember, a man reenacting his own life as fiction, and getting it right for the simplest reason there is, because he'd lived it. Few movies have ever come closer to putting the real mob on a screen, not a story about them, them.